The Abbasid rise to power was to a large extent brought about by a number of things that were happening. Remember, you were told that the Arabs had this concept of asabiya, and what Islam did was to kill it, or at least transcend it. Now, what has happened is that many of the non-Arabs who became Muslims were given the status of mawali. You became a client. You assimilate into Muslim. You're a Muslim, but you are of Persian descent. So since you did not belong to any tribal group, you will virtually be assimilated into a particular tribe so that you can be seen as one of them. You have the larger identity of being a Muslim, but you get assimilated. So they were given that kind of status. And this created some resentment among some of the groups, especially Persians and some of the other minority groups. They created movements that are known to historians as the Su'ubiyya movement. These were the equivalent of the minorities in America. They're all assimilated, they're all Americans, but the system operates in such a way that they still don't see them as part of the larger whole. You see what I'm saying? That kind of idea developed among the Arabs and the other groups, in this case the Persians. So this led to a movement against the Umayyad. And in the end, the Umayyad would be out. And the Abbasid would come to power. Now the Abbasid, of course, were named after the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. Remember, you were told that the Prophet had an uncle who never became a Muslim. Right? So these people who claim to have been the descendants of Abbas and belong to this movement that was supposedly supportive of the claims of the descendants of Ali, took power. And the Abbasid therefore became a dominant force in the history of Islam in the region. And some of their great caliphs would be instrumental in the synthesization of knowledge of the Muslims and the knowledge of the other groups. Darul Hikmah, which is widely talked about as a major center of learning that was created, became a major powerhouse for the Muslims. Because the Muslims, therefore, made use of their own people who have command of these other languages, and Jews and Christians, to help translate the classics of the previous civilization. Through this means, the Muslims were able to appropriate the best they could get. And this is one of the contribution of Muslims to Western societies, because the Muslims were now able to appropriate all the learning that was available in the Greek sources for the benefit of their own civilization. But later on, Europeans, coming out of the Dark Ages, as they used to say it, now there's a big debate among scholars whether there was a Dark Age or not. But at that time, Islam under the Abbasid was the dominant force in world history at that time. And the Muslims were able to use that knowledge to advance the frontiers of knowledge. They were able to use the philosophical and scientific knowledge of the previous civilizations, and this enabled them to really change the course of human history. Now, as a result of this Muslim hegemony during the Abbasid period, the Muslims were now able to do a number of things. And this will manifest itself in contemporary Islam. And that is because the Muslims have now feasted on the intellectual heritage of the Greeks. They were now able to come up with new schools of thought You have the Mutazilite schools of thought, which are very rationalistic Muslim school of thought. And today there are Muslims who see themselves as the children of the Mutazilites. In fact, you have the late Fazlur Rahman at the University of Chicago, who was kicked out of Pakistan by these fundamentalist groups, Jamaat-e-Islamiyya and others, ended in Chicago. And if you read his books, maybe some of you are reading his books, Fazlur Rahman, Islam and Modernity, Islam and all that, he sees himself as modern-day echo of the Mutazilites. Mutazilites were a force to be reckoned with intellectually among Muslims because of the way they responded to the Quran, the history of Islam, and to some of the key issues that have been bones of contention among Muslims. Opposed to them were the Asarites, followers of Imam al-Asari. And they have a different take on what Islam teaches with regard to free will, predestination, whether the Quran was created or not created. Those are many of the issues. Yes, please. So those are some of the issues that were coming up. Then you have the Jabarites, who believe in predestination, and they develop their own schools of thought with regard to that. And then you have the Murjis. I call them the fence-sitters. They sit on the fence. They don't want to go, philosophical fence-sitters. They don't want to be with the Asarites, nor do they want to be Asarite, Mutazilite. So they're in the fence. Because they say, well, Allahu Alam, God knows who is right. So you have these different schools of thought. So when you talk about the impact of Greek thought on the Muslims appropriated this, and some of the great Muslim thinkers before 1258. Remember, from 750 right up to 1258, the Abbasid were ruling. That's almost 500 years. And the Ottoman Empire would also last that number of years also, before they collapsed in 1914. So you can see that in the history of Islam, the Umayyad, the Abbasids, and the Ottomans will become major forces. There is an interregnum when the Caliphate was out of, because of the Mongols. And that's one reason why some of the Iraqis, they see President Bush Sr.'s invasion of Iraq as the historical parallel of Hulagu, the descendants of Genghis Khan, destroying Baghdad in 1258. The same thing happened. He killed so many of the Iraqis that you can be ankle-deep in blood because of the Iraqis that were wiped out by the Mongols in 1258. They raided all the libraries of the Muslims, and they threw all those books into the Tigris, the Euphrates and the Tigris, to the point that the river was black with ink. That shows you the number of books that were thrown into the Tigris by the Mongols. But history has a very funny way of playing games with humans. Much as the Mongols married many Christian girls, and there were a lot of Jesuits who thought that they were going to end up Christians, they made a 180 degrees and became Muslims. That gave a new lease on life to Islam after the invasion of Iraq by the Mongols in 1258. That's a long time ago, almost 750 years ago.